So today we're going to talk about social media. You guys have been having a lot of questions about it. Initially, we called this selling on social media, but we realized that before you sell, you have to connect with your customer and create a strategy to attract them. So this session is going to focus on creating a strategy, creating good goals that you can achieve, that you can track, that you can see. And you're going to leave here with essentially a plan to start applying on your business. So just letting you know that we are recording the main session. All the breakout sessions are private, they're not recorded. It is meant to be a private space for you to share with your cohort. Please rename yourself. Just click on participants and then there you will see your name. Click on it and make sure that you put the number of your cohort first. And if you don't know your cohort number, you can just let me know. And mentors and facilitators, if you realize that someone from your cohort doesn't have the number, you can change that and help them with that. I want to take a moment to thank all of our in-kind sponsors. If you are not muted, can you please mute yourself? So these businesses have given us in-kind services for your guys' graduation prizes, and I just want to acknowledge them right here. Your cohort facilitators are listed over here. Do not worry about, having to know each one of their names. It's all good. We have our cohort mentors. Each one of them is a specialist on digital marketing. So utilize their knowledge. Robert is not going to be able to join us today because he's welcoming a baby girl. So I think that today we're going to have Kelli join cohort 1 so that you guys can ask questions over there. We are on week 4, creating a social media strategy. Just letting you know that ahead we have a lot of different subjects that we're going to touch on. So some things might seem like we are giving you a little bit of information, but we're going to deepen on that later on. Please remember that we have a cohort choice on week 9, and we want to hear from you. We will send out a survey with different options that you may choose from. But you can also, some of you have been already sending me questions or requests. I have been getting them. I have been writing them down so that we can fulfill the need of most of you. Another thing that we need to talk about is that this week we have 2 mentor hours. Tomorrow is Caroline's mentor hour at 1 p.m. And on Friday, we have Kelli's mentor hour at 9 in the morning. You'll receive an email with the information to connect, but you should all already have a calendar invite with all of that information. Today's agenda, we've already done the welcome and overview. Then we have Kelli's presentation, a Q&A. Then we go on the breakout session to do an activity, and then we come back to gather. If you have any more questions, we can answer those questions, and then we'll see your next steps. I would like to invite Darren to the microphone here to talk a little bit more about homework submission. Darren, take it away.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ani. All right, folks, so there's a lot of questions about where to turn in homework this last week, and so we've come up with a really simple solution. Go to our private Facebook group. That's the 21 RAINmaker cohort Facebook group. And right there in the discussion, just hit create a post and you can input your homework there. You can add it as a file, a PDF, and then you can write anything you'd like. That allows everyone else to comment and give feedback, and it can really foster some good discussion amongst the group. So I've actually put a little post there to mention that you can add a hashtag that says hashtag homework week 3 or hashtag homework week 4. That way we can always search for past homeworks by week and they'll all pop up. It's really brilliant. So give that a try.
Let's just pause for a minute and see, does anybody have any questions at all about the Facebook page or the homework process? If you have a question, I guarantee you someone else has the same question. So feel free to ask. Just unmute yourself. We'll give it 10 seconds.
So I ran a Facebook ad and I'm not really thinking that it's doing very much more than if I just did my own Facebook post. So I would like to know how to maximize the ads that you run.
Okay, Kelli, I don't know, Kelli today is going to be talking a little bit deeper about that, but we can definitely talk more about that in our breakout. What I was wondering is, does anyone have any questions about how to post their homework to our private Facebook group page, or how to use our private Facebook page for posting homework and thoughts? Yeah, Ranjit, go ahead.
So have we decided that it goes onto the private Facebook? And so we just, I mean, the last session, there were quite a few documents. So where would you want us to submit it to? Just the main Facebook post for that week, or create a Facebook post which says submit, submit.
Caroline, I can share my screen real quick and walk us through that really fast.
That would be great.
Okay.
Thanks, Karen. Great question.
Okay. All right. Are you guys seeing my screen here of the Facebook group?
Yes.
Cool. All right. So here you are in the Facebook group. You can go to the guides section right here. And this guides section has everything organized by week. So there's everything from week 1, etc. Okay. You click on the discussion tab here. Discussion, this is where you're going to post your homework. So this, excuse me. So here in the discussion tab, this is where you see all the main sort of discussion from the group. Here's some people's homework they've already posted here. And you can see I've added the hashtag homework week 3. And so if I click on that, I would see everyone who submitted homework for week 3. But here's this explanation as well. It says post it here in the group discussion feed. So what you're going to do is make sure you're on the discussion link or tab, and then you're going to come down here to where it says what's on your mind. Okay, and you're going to come down here and you're going to add the file. Right? You're going to add file. You're going to add your PDF, and you're going to write something here like, hi group, here's my homework. In fact, this is a good time to do hashtag homework week 3. Boom. And then you can hit post, and that would be all you need to do for your homework.
Great. Thank you. And I think Ranjit, did that answer your question? Okay. And then Ron had his hand up as well.
If you guys have already emailed me your homework, do not worry about it. You don't need to upload it again or anything like that. We have that file. We just want to make it a little bit easier for you guys and for me to be able to have that. And I think it's really good in between you to share about your process with your homework, to share the feedback, because that really helps out a lot.
Mm-hmm.
All right, do we have any more questions or anything else to add?
On the participant list, I guess I listed myself on someone else's phone. I don't see me on the participant list. Sissy Ketchen.
I do see you as CC.
Yeah, but I listed, somebody chatted that I put myself on. And I don't see my name here from weeks before.
Darren, I mean, could you help her out, please?
Yeah, oh, yep.
Thank you. Let's continue.
Ron had a question.
Sorry, Ron.
No
Ask away.
problem. So in our past RAIN programs, we hadn't actually submitted homework. We had just done it. So this, I missed the announcement somewhere along the line. Can we go back and submit the homework that we've done for past weeks?
Absolutely. You guys don't have a very set deadline to submit your homework. Just do it before graduation, not an hour before, please, because we do have to work on your certificates of completion. But yeah, like if you haven't submitted until now, it's okay, work on it. I do suggest that you work in your homework each week because it unlocks some knowledge. So, you know, on the sessions, we have all of this information that you're observing. With the homework, you process that information, and then you can better take advantage of the information that comes next. It seems like Kate has a question. We'll do that question, and then we'll continue the session, okay? So you can unmute yourself, Kate.
I just have a quick question. If we're not comfortable sharing one of the results from the homework, is it okay if we send it straight to maybe you, Ani?
Yes, yeah. If you don't want to share your homework in public, just send me an email. It's all good. Yeah, no problem. All right, so today's speaker, we have Kelli with us. Kelli Matthews, she's an instructor at, hold on one second. Did I stop sharing this? Sorry, guys. Okay, well, I'm sorry if it's changing up all crazy, but I need to access something else. So Kelli Matthews, she's a senior instructor of public relations at the University of Oregon, and she also has her own firm. It is Verve Northwest. She has been doing this between 17 to 20 years and has worked with a lot of small businesses, learning from each one of them. She initially began with public relations, but then she has moved on to the digital aspect of things. And she has a lot of good knowledge that she can share it with you all. So with that, I want to present you to Kelli. Kelli, you are free to jump in, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can share your presentation.
Great. Thank you for having me. I'm super excited about this. So let's do the screen share shiftaroo. All right. So we're just going to jump in, but please feel free to ask questions as we go. You can chat. I'm pretty good about monitoring all the things, but hoping that the RAIN team can help if I'm missing hands or missing questions as I go here. Everything will be available afterwards. So if you miss anything, or if we don't get to all of the pieces today, I always try to, I'm always very ambitious with what I want to accomplish in the course of an hour. So we will.
Kelli, just so you know, sorry to interrupt you, we can see your thumbnails along the left side. I didn't know if you wanted to share full screen.
Yeah, let me just move that off. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries.
It's super secret. You can't
There we go. That's better.
No preview. You don't want to know how many slides. You don't want to know how ambitious I am. Is basically, we'll turn that off. So, all right. So we're going to talk about social media strategy. One of my favorite topics. I love doing it. I love talking about it. I love thinking about it, reading about it, all the things. And so I'm excited to share what I've learned over the course of a couple decades in communication, and how it can apply to your organizations and your businesses. So, we all want people to do stuff. We want people to buy or show up or vote or engage or donate or whatever it is, but we can't get people to do that if they don't know us and they don't trust us. So I really want to start with that know and trust piece of the puzzle, and thinking about how your content, your social media content, fuels that that awareness and that ability to build and maintain relationships with your audiences. So that's kind of my overall focus for today. So we know there's so much potential. There's, we've been doing social media now for a decade and a half. So we've seen lots of great stories. We've seen lots of great case studies. We may have experienced some of those ourselves in terms of big wins. But there's also, there's a fair amount of barrier that gets in the way of really being able to do this well. And so what I typically hear in terms of barriers, and I would actually invite you to share your own in the chat, because I think you'll see that everyone has similar challenges when it comes to social media. The barriers that get in the way, the things that keep you from being successful, are time. And social media is not time free. It's also not money free, which we're going to talk about in a second, but it takes time. And the other is capability, right? Because things change all the time. There are new platforms, new features, new tools, new algorithms, all of these things that we have to contend with on a regular basis. And so those are the two that I tend to hear the most, are the time and then just skill and capability tend to get in the way. So how can we maximize the potential? How can we maximize these wins that we know are possible and reach our goals when it comes to using social media for our business, but minimize the barriers? And the bottom line of that is to have a plan, that you have to have a plan. If you don't, you tend to operate in a hair on fire environment. Oh my God, it's Tuesday. What are we supposed to post about today? Oh my God, what are we talking about this weekend? Does somebody have a promotion? Who has the photo? Did we shoot that video? Whatever it is, it tends to be kind of a hair on fire environment. And so I'm a big fan of putting out the fire and having a plan so that you can be thoughtful and intentional about the way that you approach your social media channels. I want to set the stage for a couple of things. The first is that social media is great as a top of funnel strategy. And I'm teeing up what you're going to hear about in week 6 in terms of the marketing funnel and the sales funnel. But this is the initial, the first part of that is that you have to get eyeballs, you have to get awareness, you have to get people in the top of that funnel so that you can get people that come out the other end as buyers, as advocates, as loyal customers, whatever it is that your ultimate goal is. And so social media is great for this top of funnel. It also can be used as you move through, but in terms of its kind of best and highest use, it's wonderful for awareness, and it's wonderful for building that audience, building awareness about your brand, building awareness about your products and your services, and helping to start to pull people through that funnel. So keep that in mind. And as you're thinking about that, what I want you to do with your social media plan is start with 2 key questions. The first is, what do you want to accomplish? What do you want to accomplish, not specifically with social media, although you need that as well, but also what do you want to accomplish? What are your objectives for your business? Because social media is a tool in your toolkit. It's not, I want 5,000 followers. It's, I want to use social media to drive awareness so I can get more foot traffic or whatever. It's part of the process. It's a tool in your toolkit. So what do you want to accomplish? And who are you trying to reach? And I know you've been working on some audience segmentation thinking and work over the last week or so. And so this is in that vein, right? So identify your audience clearly and segment them as tightly as possible. Everyone with a pulse or the general public, there's no such person. There's no such audience. And so you have to think about who it is that you're talking to. And with social media, don't just assume that younger people are going to be your audience on social media, because that could be is a bit of a myth in terms of who uses social, and can really be a mistake and a miss if you don't think through who that audience is. So again, I know you've been thinking about this, so I'm likely just reiterating. You want to identify by age, maybe gender, location, family status, income, education, occupation, all of those pieces, as well as some of the psychographic information and behavioral information that you may be able to know about who your audience is, because there's no such thing as the general public. Okay. And then the next question is, what platforms do they use, right? So we're gonna, what are we trying to accomplish? Who are we talking to? And what platforms do they use? So I've got a little bit of data about this that I want to share, acknowledging that sometimes this doesn't always translate through screens and screen shares and all that stuff. So here's a basic overview of age demographic. So this is just one piece of the demographic puzzle, right? So 18 to 29-year-olds, 88% are using social media. 78% in 30 to 49, 64% in 50 to 65, and 37% in 65 and over. So not so a broad range, right? And not actually a lot of difference between that third bar and that first bar. So definitely good to not make assumptions about where your audience is and what channels they're using. And then this one is the one that's going to be a little tight. So I hope you can see it because it's a lot of data, but I'll give you a couple of things that are interesting. And so if you look at that top line, so the lime green one, that's the total percent of US adults who use those platforms, right? So under that lime green, you get a detailed breakdown in terms of some of the additional demographics. So YouTube is the most popular in terms of social platforms. YouTube tends to be more of a spectator social media as opposed to a networking social media. That's not to say there aren't communities on Instagram or on YouTube. 100% there are. And there are communities that build around YouTube, YouTube channels. But the reason that's so high is that we all use YouTube, even if we're not actively commenting and engaging and participating in a community, right? Facebook's about 69%, Instagram 37%, Pinterest 28%, LinkedIn 27%, Snapchat 24%, Twitter 22%, WhatsApp and Reddit are the last two there. And then I always love myth busting when it comes to social media use, because I think this can be really interesting. And I won't go into a lot of detail here, but you can see by age breakdown, by income breakdown, education breakdown, and then urban, suburban, rural, because that rural often gets sort of it's a rural community. They probably don't use social media is a myth that I hear a lot, that it's an urban or suburban kind of thing. And data say that's not true. So be careful about buying into some of those myths if you don't have the data to back it up. So the big thing that's not on this list is TikTok. We're still learning about TikTok in terms of the data and what TikTok provides, but here's a little bit. So TikTok officially has over 1 billion monthly active users. That's about 1/3 of what Facebook has. So in terms of the numbers, TikTok would sit between Instagram and Snapchat on the active user list. So it's a higher usage than Snapchat by about double, higher usage than Pinterest, much higher than about 2/3 higher than Twitter. So it sits in that range. It's about 500 million lower than Instagram. So that's where it sits in terms of active users. About 60% are female, 40% are male, and 80% are between the ages of 16 to 34, with more of those between the ages of 16 to 24. So 60% of TikTok users are between the ages of 16 to 24. TikTok's a little bit of the social media darling at the moment because it gets a lot of attention, but which is great. And I think that's always fun to have new opportunities to create content and build audience. If your audience is not 16 to 24-year-olds or 16 to 30-year-olds, it's probably worth ensuring that there's good ROI on the time that you would spend creating content and fostering that community.
Kelly,
So
there's
important
a
to
good
know who that who is.
Good question posted by Marty. Is TikTok really better for like branding and reinforcing your brand versus a call to action?
Yes, TikTok can be difficult for it's not super intuitive for a call to action. It works, it's great for that top of funnel, right? So that awareness building, brand building, maybe audience development, community development. But you're going to pull people off of TikTok somewhere else if you're going to be engaging them in an action as opposed to activity that just happens on the platform itself. Does that make sense? Okay.
Oh, we have a whole bunch of questions. So
I bet. All right.
Okay, you let me know. We can pause at any time, so you continue the presentation, and then we just can come
Yeah,
back.
let's take a couple. That's good.
All
This is fun.
right, good. So how do you translate this data when you sell to businesses rather than to consumers?
Yeah, good question. So if you're in a business to business, if your business is business to business, social media changes a little bit. You still need to know who your audience is, and you still need to know who your decision makers are, because you would be likely making platform decisions about where you want to spend your time and energy based on how you're going to reach those decision makers, right? So it may be that you spend less time on TikTok, which seems maybe pretty obvious, I guess, and more time on, it may be that you have a more robust LinkedIn strategy, because that's where you've figured out that your audience is and is looking for information. However, I wouldn't discount some of the consumer-based social media, because again, depending on what you're doing, you've got 3 billion active users on Facebook every month. Chances are your decision maker is there. What you have to decide is if they're open to hearing about you and open to connecting about you on a space that tends to be sort of a personal space, if that makes sense. So give you an example. Years ago, I worked with a company that puts in wireless systems in hotels. And we were having this conversation, right? Where do we spend our time? Where do we spend our energy? What social media make the most sense? And we had this exact conversation. Well, there's a lot of people on Facebook. Chances are the people who are making these decisions are on Facebook, but they're really not thinking about hotel wireless infrastructure when they're on Facebook. So it would be intrusive to put content. You wouldn't get much interaction to start with. And so if you move to sponsored posts and ads, it may feel intrusive, which could be a backfire if you were thinking about, how do I build connection? How do I build relationships? How do I, create this trust and this connection with these audiences? And you're like, wireless infrastructure, when I'm looking at pictures of my nieces and nephews, that may not fit, right? So it's thinking holistically about, where do you fit? There may be a completely different scenario where it makes perfect sense. Work with an organization now that does sort of corporate culture work, and that's less intrusive in a personal platform like Facebook, because of the kinds of content they're sharing, that it's a story sharing based program. So even if you're not particularly interested in culture building in your organization, there's good stories and interesting quotes and great blog posts and curated stuff that we share. So it's a case-by-case basis, but you certainly will want to make strategic choices. You may also be really focused on pulling people from these shared platforms like Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube onto your owned platforms, like an email or a website landing page or something like that, because the social media can be great for helping people move through their decision-making process. And if you've got a long lead where people need lots of touch points to make a decision, social's not great for that. It's going to pull people in that top of funnel, but a blog and a newsletter and maybe some lead generating content like downloads will help people move more to a decision, more through a decision. That's a really
awesome.
Answer.
Thank
one more
you.
question.
So we have another one. It's more of a comment, but I think that maybe you can give some insights on it. Somebody has been using TikTok, and it's been both fun and challenging, but they haven't seen the engagement they would like. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think probably the question, I would back up a little bit, because we want to try TikTok because it's the darling, because it's the new social media darling. And that was the impetus for participating there. Then you might back up a little bit and make sure that your objectives and your audience both align with that platform. So if your audience, again, is not kind of that 16 to 28 range, that teens and 20s, it may be tough sledding to get engagement on TikTok. That's not to say it's impossible, because there are lots of pockets of communities that exist. So it's not to say it's impossible. It may just be a little heavier slog in terms of really finding kind of slow and steady, and being consistent and participating and engaging with people, and trying different hashtags and trying different formats and trying different kinds of content to see what works.
Great.
Okay, I know there are a billion more questions.
Okay, I will write them down.
We're not going to get very far.
Yeah, I will write them down, and you guys can keep asking questions on the chat, and we will ask them. Do not worry.
Okay, good. Okay, so then we've figured out, what do we want to accomplish? Who are we talking to? What platforms are they on? And then the next question is, what do you have to say? And figuring out what is the content that you have to share. And I want you to keep in mind this diagram, right? So this is the Peso model. So there's a marketing PR agency in Chicago. Actually, a friend of mine came up with this. She's super, super smart. It's called the Peso model, and and it's paid, earned, shared, and owned. So we're taking a pretty narrow slice, right? We're talking about this shared piece of it today with social media content. That's where social media fits. But you've got all these other pieces in terms of an integrated strategy. You got to think about it across the board, and you have to think about how they all fit together. So some just generally things to keep in mind is social media is not free. It's increasingly a pay to play platform across the board. None of them are charities. So all of them have a business model, and that business model is advertising. So if you really want to make an impact on social media, there's sort of a trade-off. It's either time, and you spend a lot of time there, and you spend a lot of time engaging, creating great content, trying things out, and it's a slow and steady wins the race kind of thing, or you trade that out for money. And you put some money behind sponsored posts and ads, and having that paid strategy complement your shared strategy so that they fit together, and that will help you move the needle more quickly on social. So thinking about that mix. So just there are lots of things that fit in this diagram. Shared tends to be your social media. Owned is going to be things like your website, newsletter, email newsletter content. If you do webinars, that would be owned content. Landing pages and lead generation content would be yours. Paid is paid, so you're paying for placement, Google ads, social ads. And earned, it is your influencer space. When it comes to social, earned also is like traditional media relations and media coverage, publicity, but influencers also fit in that earned space. So what's the mix that you have in order to make sure that your approach is not is integrated and holistic? Set your KPIs. So those are your key performance indicators, and make sure that you're tracking those. So things like my engagement isn't what I want, is that engagement is likely is a KPI because you're watching that. So how are you measuring it? What's your benchmark? And what's your change in that month over month, quarter over quarter, year over year? If you look at a one-off piece of content, that's not a trend. That's just a piece of data. So you need to look holistically and track over time. So figure out what those KPIs are that are important to you, and track those over time. And you got to learn to work the ad tools. There are a lot of options. And I know you're going to talk about this in week 8. So we'll just sort of skim across the surface there. But you can, everything from social to Google to Hulu to Spotify and Pandora, they all have self-serve ad platforms and DIY ad platforms. And if your audience is in those places, you can find them and reach them with your content. So when you're creating your strategy, there's this kind of 4-piece puzzle model that I like. So You need substance, governance, workflow, and structure. And those all have to fit together. So again, I'm trying to put the hair on fire out and create an intentional and deliberate process that's going to allow you to figure out what works and what doesn't, and where you want to spend your time and energy, and not just running around with, smoldering locks. So the first piece of that puzzle is substance. So what content does your audience need / want, and why? What do you have to say? What's the substance of what you have to say? And if it's I'm awesome all the time, they're probably going to opt out, right? So if it's just screaming at people through a megaphone constantly, they're not going to be interested in that content. So put down the megaphone, think about what value you have to add. You can certainly mix in hard sell with soft sell, with curated content, with behind the scenes stuff. You figure out what that mix is, but you can't just scream at people all the time. So I'll give you an example of how I think about substance. This was a map that I created for the convention, Central Oregon Visitors Association. I was trying to remember what the letters stood for, COVA, a couple of years ago as we were looking at their strategy. And their approach for people who they want to come to Central Oregon is that they want to facilitate logistics. So you can log on to visitbend.org or whatever it is, and facilitate the logistics of getting to a vacation in that region. But then they also want to create a connection, right? So that's that know and trust piece of it. So how do you get from facilitating logistics, I want to go here, reserve there, get my tea time there, my whatever it is, all the pieces, get from that facilitation side across the bridge to create a connection? I argue it's great content. And so you need content that helps to build that bridge and creates these pillars of your bridge. So the things that we came up with for COVA was, one, inspiration. So show me Central Oregon. If you look at their content, a lot of beautiful pictures of a beautiful part of the world, right? So I'm inspired to be there. I'm inspired to want to be there. The second piece is adventure. So they found in their market research that people did not want sort of plug and play tour type vacations. They wanted to choose their own adventure. They wanted to be able to see all the options and create their own adventure. So I'm going to inspire you. I'm going to give you all of the tools to be able to create the adventure that you want to have. And then I want to be authentic about that in my content for COVA, right? So I want to be authentic in terms of creating a sense of authenticity that the people visiting the site can answer the question, how do I create a vacation that's unique and authentic to me? And so there was so their social content really facilitated the ability for people to see themselves there, to understand all the options, and to really feel that authentic connection to the place and to the region in terms of how they saw their vacation as unique to them. I want my vacation to be my vacation. I don't want it to be one that every other person I know is posting the same photos or having the same experience. I want it to be unique to me. And so COVA social media and website, both combined, really aimed to create these three pillars. So when we looked at their content calendar, it was how does their content fit in to these three pillars, and how does it ladder up to that connection and building that bridge, and kind of finding that authority place, right? So if they're all sort of this Venn diagram of amazing content and photos, how do they fit together and reinforce each other? Okay, so then the next piece is governance. Governance is how are decisions about content and strategy made? The answer to this may be, I do it because I am it, and that is how that works. That's fine. Ideally, that's not a permanent, you're going to scale that up, right? So it's not just you. So you want to think about, how do these decisions about content and strategy get made? And what does that process look like? not for the sake of sucking the fun and spontaneity out of social media, but for the sake of making it scalable. So you could have somebody come in and support that social media piece, or you can have somebody participate on your team, and there's a process in place. There's a system in place. There's the decisions, a system for figuring out how decisions get made. How is content organized, prioritized, and accessed? This is the bane of every content creator's existence. Is it in a Google Doc? Is it in Google Drive or a Dropbox? And did we use that one or we not use that one? And this is the tedium of social media. I'm not gonna lie, not my favorite part, but important. And, I have a client that I work with that has, probably 8 years of photos and a Dropbox. And every time I have to go find something, it's like, all right, put on the suit of armor, get the shovel. We're going to dig through the archives to figure out what's been used, what hasn't been used, how long has it been used, what are we doing? Is that product still in stock? Is it out of date? Is it something that's coming back? Like, what is this mix? And so, if I had all the time and energy in the world, I would reimagine that process, because that asset management is super important. And if you create a system on the front end, will save you so much time. I cannot tell you how much time I waste digging through Dropboxes and servers because there's not necessarily a system in place. And then the last piece of that puzzle is workflow. Content creates time. It takes time to create content. There's no way around that. Blog posts, videos, audio content is on the heavier end of that spectrum. A Facebook post with a stock photo is on the light end of that spectrum, but everything takes time. Everything takes time. And so figuring out how that works, how is that content created, it matters. And so all 4 of those pieces together create a smart strategy. So we could probably do a couple more questions, kind of at a natural pause here.
Awesome. So let's see. Somebody was asking if they wanted to see 2 demographic groups combined with that table that you shared before. If their customer is women from 50 to 64, do they just multiply the 2 percentages and get what they need, or is there a different method to that?
Can you ask that again?
Yes. So this person wants
That sounded like math. You need to.
Their client falls on 2 different age groups. So it's 50 to 64. And they want,
got it. Okay.
Yeah,
right.
So they wonder how to use those.
Okay. So if it's like 30 to 49 plus 50 to 64, is that?
Yes.
So 2 different age groups. So obviously if you just add it together, you get more than 100%. So you want to be careful about anytime you get this. First of all, this isn't my data. So you're going to ask me to slice and dice data that I didn't create in the first place. So that makes it hard for me to know, because I don't have a methodology in front of me to really answer in depth. However, I think you can kind of ballpark it, right? So if you've got a demographic that's crossing, right? So you've got women out of 100% of people surveyed, 68% of women say they use YouTube. Then you take that same equation, right? So out of 100% surveyed, and this was a national sample, so it's generalizable to the overall public. So out of US adults, 68% of women use YouTube. US adults, 70% of ages 50 to 64 use YouTube. It's really difficult to figure out where that intersection is, right? Although what I would probably do, and somebody who's much better at math than on the fly than I am can help me out with this, is that of that 70% of ages 15 to 64, 68% of those are likely to be women. Sometimes raw numbers are easier. So imagine it's 100 people in the total survey, right? So imagine you've got an audience of 100. 73 of those are using YouTube. 68 of those are women. That's one variable, right? So you've got 68% of that group of 100 that are women. And then your second variable is the age range. So again, out of 100, 70% of those are between ages of 50 to 64. So you have to sort, unless you have the raw data, it's a little difficult to get an exact answer, but you can sort of eyeball it, right? So about 68% of each category you can imagine is going to be women, if you're just sort of eyeballing it. That is a super convoluted answer. I don't know if that helped or not. Again, not my data. You can look at, this comes from Pew Internet Research, and I can see if I can find the original post that may give you a little bit more in terms of methodology and may dig in a little differently. And I don't mean it's not my data as sort of a dismissive thing. It's just really hard because I don't have the methodology in front of me to be able to tell you, all right, let's come in this door and we can get this other answer.
All right. Well, thank you for that. We have a few comments on the chat that an analyst made. So if you guys want to go over there and see. Let's see these other questions over here. Well, it's kind of similar. It's all with the data. So I don't know if you want to keep answering these kind of questions, you let me know. But you know, women, people that have their customer be women between 25 and 35 who are college educated and make 40K a year or more.
So what platform are they on? Is that what the question is?
They didn't, I think this is all more about the research of their customer, more so than a specific platform.
Oh, okay. So if that's your customer, you're probably, I mean, you can, again, there's one chart, but you could probably use this chart to say, well, they're probably on Facebook, Instagram, and maybe LinkedIn. Less LinkedIn. I'd say probably if that's your audience, you're leaning on Facebook and Instagram.
Okay. Yeah, a lot of people are asking where can they find this kind of data so that they can dive deeper into it.
So that research is from the Pew Internet Research Center, and they put out a lot of data about demographic use and social media use. So I would point people in that direction, and don't know if they make their raw data available, but I wouldn't be surprised. I just haven't ever looked for it specifically, but I wouldn't be surprised if you could even get, you know, spreadsheets and tables to play with if that's your jam.
So I'm going to share what I would do if I had people in different brackets that just collide. Just do an average of the percentage, and that gives you like an idea of it. You know, none of this data, this is all what's considered secondary data. You can use that, and it will inform your decisions. But the primarily what you want to do is do one-on-one customer discovery. Essentially, that's why you do customer interviews, because that is more direct and it gives you more information on how people behave, and that can guide you in the process of being able to reach them. Just a thought.
Ranjit also has his hand up.
I have what's that?
Ranjit has his hand up.
Okay, let me ask a few more questions that are in the pipeline, and then we'll give him the microphone.
Great. You're on mute, Ani.
I mute myself, sorry. Do you have a lead generator tool or resource that you would recommend for a product-based company?
A link generator, was that the first part of that question?
A lead generator.
Oh, lead generator, yeah. Sorry.
Yes.
Lead generator. That's going to be dependent on what you're doing with it. So if it's If you're giving people a download and you want to collect information on a download, then you would probably you could use either your website service, or you could use an email marketing tool to do that part of it. MailChimp, for example, makes landing pages and provides that lead generation tool. If you're that's a little bit of a case by case answer. I think I'm not feel like I need more info to make a specific recommendation.
All right, so if whoever has that question, if you can elaborate on that, that will be great. In the meantime, Ranjit, you can ask your question.
Hi, Kelly. Yes, I can feel the anxiety rise when we talk about this, because I have to deal with the social media side and the stories and the organic and paid, which is a nightmare. So I get some people sometimes to do it, but it is a dangerous path to go down if you do some of the things that Facebook and Instagram want you to do, like, boost a post. Don't boost your post. But I wanted to just figure something out here in that, are we talking organic here today or paid? Because really one of the things that we found for Million Steps was just keep collecting the stories. You just need a bucket full of stories, and talking about hair and fire moment, stop the hair and fire, even if you have to not post anything out for a week or two, start writing quick stories, use Canva to write simple lines, and have what's it called, a buffer zone in which you can just throw things in there if you haven't got the time. Because if you're like, if you're like a small team like me and my chief technical officer, then it's
for sure. So to answer the kind of the either or, this is largely organic today, because I know that the paid stuff is coming in a few weeks and I didn't want to steal anyone's thunder. So I promised I would just tee up that you need to be thinking about it. So we're not going to spend really any additional time on paid today. But you're right, having like some evergreen content that you can have just at the ready, so that you don't have to have like, I joke that social media, sort of joke, it's true, that social media only has to look spontaneous. It doesn't have to be spontaneous. So it can be, that you have, like you said, things like quotes, like quote tiles are great and people love them. And we all sort of like poo-poo them, like, oh, that's so tired, but people love them. And the engagement is usually high and the response is usually good, as long as it's relevant and interesting and not the same stupid quote we've seen 100 times, but making it relevant and interesting to your brand, and saying something interesting. And so there are lots of ways to do that. That's not in the moment, right? It doesn't have to be in the moment. It doesn't have to be something that is spontaneous, or that even has to do with what you're doing exactly, right? It doesn't have to be timely or specific. And if you're in a place where you're like, I don't even have a lot to share at this point about what I'm doing, how can you build audience and build connection in that, like in the bubble of what you do, right? So if you're, maybe if you understand who your audience is and you understand sort of how you fit in that life of that audience person, what else exists in that bubble? What else exists in their world that is interesting, that could be an interesting connection point for you and potentially some content. I had a client years ago that made eco baby wipes, random startup product. And we talked a lot about not just her product, because it was like one thing, right? So that you can only say yay baby wipes so many times. But we talked about, organic cotton baby clothes. And we talked about the importance of building a sustainable home. And we talked about, like, what does industrial composting mean? Because that was part of their model. And so there was a lot of, in that bubble of a parent who might be thinking about buying eco baby wipes, what else exists in that bubble? And how can you create content that's part of that, the way they're thinking, part of their life and part of the natural conversation. And then you're like, oh, hey, by the way, we've got this cool thing. Parents are like, oh, well, that fits in my bubble quite nicely. So a way to think about it. But yeah, evergreen stuff is great. So you can have that buffer zone where you have things ready to roll that keep you engaged, but aren't necessarily specific or timely or newsy or whatever.
Thank you, Kelly. We have like 5 to 6 questions here, but I do see that you have quite a bit more to present. So
you guys, look at that. So I would like you to adjust,
continue.
I would like you to clear your calendars. We're going to be hanging out here until about 1 o'clock. FYI.
It's great that you guys are asking questions. If it's okay with you, Kelly, if we have leftover questions, we can address them on the mentor hour. And if you're available to answer them through email, then we can do that. But I think it's important that we continue the presentation, and then we'll come back and answer more questions.
Okay, so here's a question, an in the moment process question for you and probably Caroline, is that we do have this activity at the end. If we want to turn that into more just Q&A, that would be fine. And I can tee up the activity as homework, or would you like to use that time to do more Q&A?
Guys, make your comments on the chat. So the activity we have planned for our breakout session is to work on a content calendar. And what we're going to do is choose one person from each cohort and essentially brainstorm on that calendar. So we could do that, or you guys can work on it in your own time, and then we just do a Q&A. So make your votes on the chat, and we'll see about it.
All right, sounds good.
For Q&A, so we'll see.
All right, that sounds good. Yes, I'm good either way. So can
we do a poll?
I can see the chat number going up. So
a poll would be great, actually.
Yes. So we can see if it's easier to answer questions, we can pull off the screen share and just answer questions. And I'm happy to do that. So no problem at all. Okay, so let's get through a few more slides and then we'll revisit that question in a moment. So so details matter, right? So we've got this, we're going to build this great structure. We know our audience. We have so many great ideas. So details matter, right? So here are kind of the big 6 in terms of social media platforms. And roughly, if you want to think about best kinds of content, what do you want to think about for each of these platforms? So there's and you guys can read this and you'll have this to look at later. What the emphasis I want to make is that every platform has its own best style, its own space, its own kind of etiquette, its own best and highest use, so to speak, that you have to pay attention to, that those details matter. So if you take the same piece of content and you push it out, our poll is 50-50. You guys are useless. You've got to come up with an answer. Come on. So there's
was it really 50-50? Really 50-50?
It's really 50-50. So if you care, vote. This is your time. This is hilarious. Slight edge on the Q&A, by the way. Slight edge. Watching the poll here. That's fascinating. So there's paying attention to these details, because if you take one piece of content and you push it out to all your platforms, you run the risk of not maximizing that platform and not really engaging the audience on that platform. So give you a couple of examples. Twitter, as an example, has a very horizontal image space, right? So it crops very horizontally. Now, if you're on mobile feed, you get a little bit different space, but that horizontal is the dominant profile for Twitter. So if you push out the same image with the same content on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, as an example, your Twitter may crop weird. So it's not maximizing that platform and not being read by that audience cleanly and clearly. Twitter obviously has a character count limit, so you have to be conscientious of that. Hashtags aren't great on Facebook. So if you're pulling hashtags from one platform to another, they don't necessarily translate and they don't necessarily have an impact. In fact, they can have a negative impact because people on Facebook are like, so you have to be conscientious of those differences. I'm a big fan of picking the ones that make the most sense and just doing them really well and not feeling like you have to be everywhere and not feeling like you have to be everything to everyone, that you just pick the ones that make sense. So each one is going to have a very specific format and best use in terms of the way that they work. So be conscientious of that because those details matter. They matter, and you don't want people to round file your social or opt out in the digital sense. You don't want people to opt out or ignore or hide or unfollow because their preferred platform, you're clearly not creating content for them on their preferred platform. That's what it has to feel like, is that this is for me, this is on this platform, this is the kind of thing I want to engage with. We all know it's not for us, but it has to feel like it's unique. So I have a couple of examples. I'm going to cruise through these relatively quickly, just as a to share a couple of examples from different platforms. So Facebook is image heavy, but not exclusively. You can still have text content, and you can do those, where you put in the background thing. So you don't have to have an image on Facebook, but certainly it's better. And you get much more engagement when you have either still image or moving image on Facebook. So good quality images matter. When we first started teaching social media, there was a heavy emphasis on sort of amateur feeling because everyone could create content, right? So everyone create content, put it up, feels instant and authentic. People's preferences have kind of moved away from that a bit. There's some shift depending on who your demographic is and depending on the platform. But for the more static platforms like Instagram and Facebook, quality images matter. Keep your copy short, really relying on the image for the content. Another one for Twitter, again, short copy and the image is the right size, so there's no crop. Instagram is another, so making sure that you're, again, compelling image, it's very image heavy, nice short copy. Hashtags are great on Instagram. It helps with discovery, helps people to find you more easily. So that's important on Instagram stories. I really liked this example from Salomon. It was an Instagram, a series of stories where they had influencers sharing what's in their pack. So they had a compelling image. They did a poll. People love the interactive stuff on Instagram stories. And then this was a shoppable, this was a swipe up. So it was a shoppable link on that story in particular. And then one more example for Pinterest. Pinterest is very vertical. So you have an optimized image that takes up the most amount of space it can. Pinterest also has really good search engine optimization, really good Google juice. So if you're creating great keyword rich copy and naming your boards appropriately, you can get a fair amount of traffic just because of that, and it's worth doing. Okay, so that's a lot of ingredients in the stew, right? So we've put a lot of things in the stew. So in order to make sure that it all fits together, having an editorial calendar will save you and save your sanity and make it feel like you're not running around with your hair on fire. So the editorial calendar or content calendar, you'll see them called both things, is just a way to organize your content. My favorite way to approach this is just to spend some time brainstorming, spend some time with your team or with some customers or with people that you just like and think have good ideas, like the people in this room, brainstorming some ideas and brainstorming some content. And here's some prompts, right? So do you have events coming up? Does your business have seasonality? Does it have peaks and valleys? We're coming up on fourth quarter, or we're in fourth quarter, but coming up on holiday season. So if you have any sort of consumer facing, if you're a consumer facing brand at all, you're probably thinking about how to maximize that time. So what is the seasonality? If you don't specifically have seasonality, think about the everyone else's seasonality, right? So right now we're starting to think holidays. In January, it's New Year, New You. March, we're talking about spring. June, we're talking about summer, back to school in the fall. So there's all of these like clear sort of markers that you can tie your content to in a way that's authentic, because it's what everybody's talking about. It's on everybody's mind. Okay, so here's what I had planned for the activity. Where are we with the poll?
Well, with the poll, we have 36 people that answered out of 51. Now we got a very close. Q&A is 56% though, and the activity is 44%. So I think that what we can do to cater both, but not really.
Yeah,
is,
I'll walk you through this. I can walk
through it,
yeah.
And then we do Q&A, and we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay. Okay, so this is the idea of the content calendar, is that I typically, I'll just use myself as an example and walk us through this. So I would typically build about an 8-week calendar at a time. Anything beyond that, you can't control. So you would just end up revising it. Anything shorter than that, your hairs is still a little bit on fire. So you want to try to plan broad categories for about, I would say 6 to 8 weeks at a time. I typically will use something that looks like this. So it's just a spreadsheet. It's not complicated. It's not fancy. It's literally just an Excel spreadsheet that breaks it into the week. So that first column where it says week, this column would be my theme. So I come up with some themes for each week. And then this first row are maybe the highlights or the events or the calendar things that I want to make sure that I remember. So in the last couple of days, I went and looked at, there's a website called daysoftheyear.com. There's another one called nationaldays.com. And it lists all of the weird and wacky and legitimate and everything in between days observances. So there's, if you're short on ideas, it's a great place to look. So I went and pulled out a few things that might be relevant to a general calendar, right? So Monday the 1st is World Vegan Day. So that may be relevant and interesting, and there may be some content that you could create around that. Maybe not, and that's fine. Tuesday the 2nd is Day of the Dead. Obviously cultural touchstones, so be careful with the cultural touchstones and be careful about being, authentic and sensitive about holidays like or observances like Day of the Dead, but that it may very well be super relevant to you and your brand and authentic to who you are. Friday, let's see, we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Friday the 5th is National Jersey Day. So if you've got any kind of sports tie-in, that's a great place to do that. Or if you're just, rabid duck fans or beaver fans or whatever, that's a great place to tie into that. That's actually a big one on social media, National Jersey Day. Everybody wears their jerseys and post pictures. So could be a great one. And then of course we build in Black Friday, Small Business Saturday, further down this list, Cyber Monday, Giving Tuesday, that whole weekend of days. Again, different places for you to tie in. November 16th is National Entrepreneurs Day, so celebrate yourselves, please, in some way on that day. That's added that in. So the idea would be not start plugging things in here, but to brainstorm and figure out, are there some themes that we can look at? Are there some some threads that you can pull through each of these weeks that everything ties back into. Let me give you an example. This is a company I worked with for a while that makes stationery. So she's an artist and she makes cards and little cupcake topper thingies and all sorts of cute stuff. So that calendar I just showed you, this is that calendar filled in, right? So same format. Our theme, and this was a summer calendar. So our theme for the week of June 23rd was DIY projects, keeping kids entertained, right? So her audience, largely women, 35 to 50 would be sort of her range. That women in that range who mostly have kids, her audience mostly have kids, are staring down the barrel of 3 months of, oh my God, what am I going to do with these creatures for the next 3 months? So that is a topic of conversation. That is a thing that audience was thinking about, talking about, figuring out, having conversations about. Are they going to camp? Are they doing this? Are they doing that? And figuring out what to do with those kids. So we took that and plugged that in as a theme, right? So these are DIY projects, keeping kids entertained, and then used that as a thread to pull through the week. So when we chose on Monday, it was a featured design. When we chose that design, we chose, if I'm remembering correctly, we chose kid-friendly, kind of kid-oriented greeting cards with the project of, let's send thank you notes to all of our teachers from this year, for example. So you've got a little, fun, marginally fun, but something that would engage your kids for a couple of hours and get them thinking about thank you notes and, etiquette and correspondence and all that stuff. On Tuesdays, we did a curated post. So it was go find something that fits that theme from another blog and post it on this Tickled Pink's social media. We did some custom work. I think we even had this is actually, this calendar is a little bit old, so I'm trying to remember the details. We had some little DIY projects that were like paper craft projects. So we featured those. We did Photo Friday is one of my favorite standard social media plugin columns. Like everybody loves pretty photos. So finding a photo that was relevant to this brand. And then we posted a blog once a week. So you can see that the blog was teaching kids the art of writing thank you notes. So we have this blog that's on the theme of the week, and then the content sort of all reinforces that, even though it's not all read our blog, read our blog, read our blog, read our blog. It's or buy our stuff or do our thing. It's all in kind of in service of this theme. And this theme sort of lets all the content kind of hang together. So the idea for you would be to think about, really to take inventory and to think about what assets do you have? What are the themes? What do you have to say? What are the topics you want to talk about? What assets do you have? Do you have photos? Do you have video? Do you have quotes? Do you have, what's the content that you have? And then what do you need? So what do you need to create to satisfy that calendar, to satisfy that content calendar? Right. So if I go back to this, I have some product images, like on white kind of product images, but I really needed lifestyle stuff to go along with the blog, for example. So I quite literally took cards and set my kid at a table and made him pretend he was writing a note and took a picture and used that for this blog because I needed that asset. So figured that out. Sometimes we did stylized stuff. You can kind of see it along the bottom. We had stylized photos. We did some short little video clips or all kinds of pieces, but we planned that in advance. So it wasn't like, oh my God, it's Wednesday, we're supposed to post a blog. I don't have a photo for the blog. Where are we going to get a photo? And pulling it together at the last minute. And then once you have that inventory and you figured out, what do I have? What do I need? And how am I going to get it? You can remix and repurpose and use that content over and over. This calendar is a 1 week snippet this blog could easily be 5 or 6 posts, right? Not in the same week. I'll pull it apart and use it in different times of the year. But if I've got the assets, I've got the blog, I've got some quotes, I've got a couple pictures, I've got some data that says how important it is for kids to learn to write thank you notes or something. So I've got this like soup of content and these assets in this inventory. I can remix and repurpose that and use it multiple times. When you spend the time to make the assets, particularly the time heavy assets like videos, audio, blogs, don't just share it once and call it done. Figure out how to pull it apart and remix it and repurpose it so you can get multiple pieces of content out of that. I had a client I work with right now, that company culture client I mentioned, corporate culture client, and she had a great blog post that had a list of 5 things, 5 skills that you need to build a good hybrid company culture. So we took those 5 and pulled them apart and did a series of 5. So it wasn't just one, here's a thing, here's a blog, go read it, but it was a series of 5. And what I saw when I looked at the data this week was not just the normal sort of traffic for a single blog, but that traffic times 5. So it was that people were looking at it, one person probably didn't see all 5 posts for starters, because you don't see everything. So it was substantially more traffic across those 5 posts than I would have seen if I posted it one time. So assets and things that you can remix might be photos, might be sound or music, could be videos, quotes, news, trends, data, maybe some tie into history, or tie into some pop culture moment, or mainstream media content. That there could be all kinds of ways to pull those in and then remix and repurpose. I'll give you a really small scale example. This is from 2017. So 4 years ago, I worked with Chambers Construction for a long time managing their social. And we had one announcement. It was pre-Civic Park, way back when it was still just a dirt lot after Civic Stadium had been cleaned out. Just a dirt lot, one announcement. This phase 2 complete. Great. What do we do with that? So we had 2 architectural renderings. Here are our assets down the side. We had 2 architectural renderings. We had data from the client release, the client press release, the Civic Park release about the lack of field space in Lane County for kids to play sports. And then we had the social media profiles for all of the parties involved. Those are all assets, right? So then how do we remix and repurpose? We did it with a couple of Facebook posts. We did one Twitter, and all of them looked a little bit different. One sponsored LinkedIn post and an Instagram post. So small scale, right? This doesn't have to be, I don't have anything big to talk about. This is a narrow, small scale example of how that remix and repurpose can work. Okay, so I think that's where we are for Q&A. So do we want to do some Q's and A's?
Absolutely. We have like 10 questions here.
I
so
bet.
Try my
You guys
best.
better have the questions. You voted on it.
So do you have, I know you were just talking about it, but do you have recommendations for repeating or rotating content or not repeating content ever?
First of all, my biggest recommendation is don't overthink it, because nobody knows you're repeating anything but you, quite frankly. Nobody's paying that much attention. You're the only one that's paying that much attention. And chances are, if you feel like you're being repetitive, that's exactly when you should keep doing what you're doing, because you're reinforcing your message. You're being disciplined about your message and disciplined about your content. If you're bored, that's probably fine. That's not usually a bad thing. Now, you don't want to send people to the same thing 30 times every day, right? Like, that's silly, and that's not what I mean. But you want to, take the asset that you want to promote, that you've created, figure out what you want it to do, right? So it's probably not an asset for the sake of asset, but it's probably a blog post that's going to point back to your website, or a video that's going to announce something, or whatever it is. Like if you're remixing and repurposing, I would say with most things, you can probably get between 4 and 6 different posts out of that, if you're clever and creative, out of some piece of content, and sometimes more than that. I'm going to have to look up his name because it's slipping my mind, but there's a writer on Twitter, and he has a Substack newsletter, and he does a phenomenal job of remixing and repurposing. He writes like 2 feature stories every 2 weeks, like feature style news stories. And he pulls quotes and shares different photos and posts them at different times of the day. And if you go to his feed and like look through it, you'd be like, you're just pointing me to the same thing over and over. But nobody does that. Nobody does that. They just look at their feed and see content come through. So chances are nobody's going to notice if you're being repetitive, unless you're really don't have anything else to talk about and you're just saying the same thing over and over. Most of the time we just collectively, we overthink it because we know we've posted the same thing 5 times.
All right, thank you. How do you get influencers?
You either have great product to trade or you pay them. So how do you find them? You do a lot of listening and monitoring. So you figure out who is, what are the hashtags that people are using that relate to your product or service or what you're trying to accomplish. Figure out who the influencers are. So follow people, listen, pay attention to the kinds of things they talk about, the kinds of things that get interaction, the sort of engagement, the type of content that gets engagement. And then when you interact with them, so like their stuff, comment on their stuff, when you feel like you've made a good match and you have a good fit, you can reach out. Often that's just in a direct message or of some kind. You can just reach out and say, interested in collaborating. More words than that, but that's the message, is interested in collaborating, and see what the response is. But it's typically, it's not necessarily a lot of money unless you're looking for, mega influencers, but the sort of micro or nano influencer space, all of these terms are arbitrary, but they tend to talking about people who have fewer than like 10,000 followers, for example, kind of fit in micro, and then fewer than 5,000 is nano. But there's lots of research that's been done with those influencers they're actually more influential than people who may have a larger following. So it's not necessarily a space to ignore. Influencers tend to hang out mostly on Instagram and YouTube. So thinking about how those numbers translate into those on those platforms. But if you've got an experience, or you've got a product in trade, or you've got some access that you want to give, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to pay them. But it's sort of a time or money trade-off. Like that's the perpetual trade-off with social stuff.
Okay, awesome. So I have another question here. If you have an event, a weekly event, what percentage of posts should be about that event?
You have a weekly event. I would say if it's your primary way of communicating about that event, oh gosh, maybe 20%, 25%.
All right, awesome. How often do you recommend posting to Facebook and Instagram, etc.? Like how often should one post on social media?
I'm gonna lean a little bit again on that time or money trade-off. If it's more organic, then I would say between 4 and 6 posts a week on Facebook and Instagram. If you've got more money than time, you can back that off a little bit and do and run campaigns that promote that organic content. So, and there are lots of ways to do that, but so it's a little bit of a trade-off. I've got a client I'm working with right now that algorithms, we've seen a decrease in organic engagement on the 4 to 6 times a week post. So we're actually going to back off of that and go to fewer posts and put more money behind fewer posts and see how that changes the equation. It's a little bit of an experiment because I'm mostly putting money, my objective for that is around awareness and not around traffic or sales or anything like that. It's mostly just to build some awareness and build some brand recognition, which is really hard. It's really hard to measure and know if that's really working. So like I have a number, but what does that number mean? So it's a little bit of an experiment to see what happens. Sometimes you'll get a little bit of a halo effect if you're doing a lot of doing a fair amount of paid promotion. You'll get a halo effect, so you also see a lift on your organic reach because people are interacting with your paid, so they're also more likely to see your organic. So you get a little bit of a halo effect. So Facebook would never tell you that that's a thing, but I've seen it over and over with my own metrics and own audits that I've done. So yeah, so it's a time or money. It's either spend the time creating organic content or spend some money behind sponsored content.
All right, well, guys, we are running out of time and we need to talk about next week.
I'll see you all on Friday morning, right? Everyone's going to show up on Friday morning.
Hopefully. I did write down all of your questions and I see a few of them are coming up right now. So I will make sure to copy all of this on the chat and answer all of those. So essentially what I wanted to tell you is that next week we are going to be talking a little bit more about ads, okay? And we're going to be understanding analytics and how the different ad platforms work. This is mostly geared towards Google and Facebook and Instagram. Mentor hours for this one are going to be on that Friday at noon. With that, I think that's all I had to share with you. That's all. The homework will be sent to you, posted on Facebook group, and also will be sent to you via an email because I know some of you do not use Facebook, and that's okay. I don't know, Kelly, if you are willing to answer maybe one more question. If not, that's fine. It is 10:29, so I'll leave that up to you. Go for it. All right. Let me see over here. Okay. So is there a downside to sharing on Facebook what you post on Instagram?
If you're going to sync between any two platforms, that's the best connection because they play nicely together. I would still post them separately. I still wouldn't automatically post from one to the other. I would take off, I would post on LinkedIn. You have hashtags are really important. They're really important to find and use. To find good ones and use them consistently because it really has an impact on your discoverability. And it really has an impact on helping the algorithm help people find you, right? So Caroline and I are talking about the same thing and we're using the same hashtag. Instagram is more likely to show me Caroline's stuff because it sees that we have something in common. Does that, so it's sort of not outsmarting, it's maximizing the algorithm to be able to see that. So hashtags on Instagram are important, finding the right ones and using them consistently, or finding good ones, or experimenting and trying a new batch and kind of running an experiment with hashtags to figure out what works. Instagram's insights will tell you how much traffic is coming from hashtags, so you can see if it's working or not on Instagram's insights panel. Facebook, and not only are hashtags not useful, they can at best they'll have no impact, at worst they'll have a negative impact on your engagement and your reach. Facebook, the hashtags just don't translate. The etiquette and expectation of people on Facebook is just different. Even though people know what hashtags are, or they tend to have a better sense of what hashtags are, they just don't translate on to Facebook. So I would still post them separately. I would post on Instagram and then post on Facebook. Facebook's Creator Studio allows you to set those up. So there's a free scheduling tool. You don't have to pay anything for it. Facebook's Creator Studio, where you can set one up and then set up the other one, and make sure they're scheduled and they're ready to roll at whatever time you decide.
I was just going to chime in and say I agree with that, setting up separately, because one of the things that frustrates me when someone posts on Instagram and then just automatically posts to Facebook, all the ats don't make sense because they're adding their Insta account, not their Facebook handle. And so not only do you not get to know who those people are, you don't understand what, there's no link to those people. And so I'm glad that there's an easy way to post on the two different ones so that you can add the right accounts. But this was awesome. Thank you, Kelli, so much. We really appreciate you taking the time away from teaching your students at the U of O. And a lot of folks here don't know, Kelli and I started social media boot camps 15 years ago in Eugene and had people flying from all over. And we were just laughing earlier about how outdated that content would be right now if we went back and looked at those slide decks. But I just want to say thank you. And thank you everybody for showing up consistently. I mean, this is how we're going to make change in our businesses and make impact. And thank you, Ani, for being our leader. And I look forward to seeing you guys at my mentor hours this week. And hopefully you guys show up for Kelli's as well.
Thank you, everybody. Just so you know, Nate is buying the first drink today in Halsey and Brownsville, then on Sweet Home on Thursday. So he's all over the place. Make sure you email him at nate@oregonrain.org to get more information on that and the specific location. You guys can talk about this. You can talk about other things that are relevant for your business. And we really appreciate you connecting, Kelli. Thank you so much for all of this. We have so many more questions left. So this is kind of hinting us to what kind of information you guys want on your cohort choice, but we're still gonna ask you to see what you decide. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. And we look forward to seeing you in the upcoming sessions.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
And we're